The morning sun had not yet broken the horizon when the first rounds tore through the elephant grass. The radio crackled with a voice too young to sound so desperate. Medevac inbound, 10 mics, 10 minutes. In war, 10 minutes could be a lifetime or an eternity, depending on which side of the bleeding you stood. Private First Class James Brennan pressed his face into the mud of Quang Tri Province, 17 years old and already learning the arithmetic of death. Around him, 12 men from his squad lay scattered across the killing field like broken toys discarded by an angry god. The NVA had caught them in the open during a routine patrol near the Laotian border, and routine had become a massacre in the span of heartbeats. The squad corpsman, a kid from Ohio whose name was printed on a body bag 3,000 miles away waiting to be filled, worked with hands slick with blood that was not his own. He moved from man to man with the frantic energy of someone who understood that time was the real enemy here, more lethal than bullets, more final than shrapnel. Brennan watched the corpsman press gauze into a sucking chest wound, watched the gauze turn red, watched the light fade from eyes that had been laughing at a joke about a bar in Saigon just 30 minutes ago. He heard the corpsman screaming into the radio, "They cannot wait 10 minutes. They will all be dead in 10 minutes. Send the bird now." The voice on the other end was calm, professional, distant, negative. "Area too hot. Medevac will not enter unsecured LZ. Stand by." Stand by. Two words that meant watch them die. And Brennan did watch. He watched all 12 men bleed out over the next 45 minutes while the medevac circled overhead, rotors thumping a rhythm that sounded like heartbeats slowing to silence. When the helicopter finally touched down, it was collecting corpses, not casualties. The corpsman from Ohio sat in the blood-soaked grass and wept. Brennan did not weep. Something inside him had calcified in those 45 minutes, had turned hard and cold and permanent. The sun rose over the valley. Brennan was still 17 years old. He would never be 17 again. The operation had a name, Operation Dewey Canyon 2. The Army called it a success. 12 families received folded flags and condolence letters. Brennan received a Purple Heart in nightmares that would last 5 decades. He also received a lesson written in the blood of men he could not save. When medics stayed back, soldiers died waiting. But when command sent help too early into hot zones, medics died first, and then everyone died slower. There was no right answer, only impossible choices rendered in corpses and survivor guilt. 52 years later, Colonel James Brennan stood in the Afghan dawn and adjusted his tactical vest with the practiced motion of a man who had been doing it longer than most of his soldiers had been alive. He was 69 now, though the Army believed he was 65. He had lied about his age to enlist in 1971, and he had never corrected the record. Some lies became truth through repetition and time. He should have retired a decade ago, but men who could not stop fighting wars rarely stopped of their own accord. Forward Operating Base, Pamir squatted in the Kandahar dust like a fortress built from shipping containers and sandbags, and the accumulated exhaustion of men who had been deployed too many times. Brennan walked the perimeter as he did every morning at 0500, inspecting positions, checking fields of fire, looking for the small things that killed soldiers when commanders stopped paying attention. His chest carried the weight of 4 decades rendered in colored ribbon and metal. Silver Star from Fallujah, Bronze Star with V device from the Korangal Valley, Purple Heart with 3 clusters, the first earned in 1971 watching 12 men die. Each medal represented a story, a decision, a moment when the universe had balanced on the edge of a blade and came down on the side that let him live and make more decisions that would earn more medals. Sergeant Major Patrick O'Brien fell into step beside him without saying anything. They had served together for 20 years, long enough that conversation was optional. O'Brien was 54, a career NCO whose father had been a Navy corpsman in Vietnam. The father had died in the same province where Brennan lost his squad, part of the same operation, arriving too late to save anyone. O'Brien carried that legacy like he carried his rifle, always present, always ready. "Martinez wants to talk tactics again," O'Brien said after they had walked half the perimeter. Brennan kept his eyes on the guard towers. "She wants forward positioning." "Yes, sir." Answer is still no. "She has data, sir. Pretty compelling data." "Data does not capture reality, Pat." They finished the perimeter walk in silence. The sun climbed higher. In 6 hours, Brennan would brief the battalion on Operation Iron Fist, a village clearing mission that intel said would be routine. Brennan had stopped believing in routine operations somewhere between Iraq and Afghanistan, in the space where optimism went to die. He returned to his quarters and opened the small wooden box he kept in his footlocker. Inside was a photograph, creased and faded, showing 13 young men in jungle fatigues, weapons slung, smiling at something the camera could not capture. 12 of those men were dead, killed in Quang Tri Province, February 1971. The 13th was looking at their picture 52 years later, still trying to understand what it meant that he had survived. Brennan closed the box without touching the photograph. Next to it sat an orange prescription bottle, full, untouched. The label read sertraline with instructions to take one daily for post-traumatic stress disorder. The bottle had been full for 6 months. Brennan believed that some ghosts were meant to stay. He had lived with them for 52 years. They were the only company that understood what he had seen, what he carried, why he could never quite leave the war, even when the war had officially ended decades ago. Captain Emily Martinez saved the 19-year-old at 06:15, exactly 3 minutes after the IED turned his morning patrol into a fight for breath. The soldier lay on the surgical table in the trauma tent, his chest torn open by shrapnel, his left lung collapsed, his blood pressure dropping toward the numbers where bodies stopped being people and became statistics. Martinez worked with the focused intensity of a surgeon who had learned her craft in the emergency rooms of Baltimore before she learned it in the forward operating bases of the War on Terror. Her hands moved with precision, inserting the chest tube, releasing the pressure that was crushing his heart. The soldier gasped, coughed, breathed. Specialist Marcus Washington stood beside the table, holding the light, watching Martinez work with an expression that was half awe and half terror. He was 22, fresh on his first deployment, cross-trained as a combat lifesaver because the modern army believed everyone should know how to keep their buddies alive long enough for someone like Martinez to finish the job. "Going to make it, ma'am?" Washington asked. Martinez did not look up from her work. "He is making it right now. Whether he keeps making it depends on the next 6 hours." The soldier stabilized. Martinez stripped off her gloves and walked out of the tent into the morning heat. She stood for a moment, letting the sun burn away the smell of blood and antiseptic. In her pocket, she carried a photograph of her own. Marine Corporal Daniel Martinez, killed in action, Fallujah 2004, age 23. Her brother, dead because the medevac took 30 minutes to arrive at his position, and he only had 28 minutes of blood left in his body. Emily Martinez had joined the Army to make sure that never happened to anyone else's brother. She had spent 8 years learning that the universe did not care about her intentions, only her choices. She was 32 now, had been deployed 3 times, had saved more soldiers than she had failed to save. But the failures haunted her in ways the successes never could. Success was expected. Failure was permanent. The briefing room at 0900 was packed with officers and senior NCOs, maps and satellite imagery covering every wall, the smell of bad coffee and Strauss sweat thick in the recycled air. Brennan stood at the front, pointer in hand, face set in the expression of command that he had worn so long it had become permanent. "Operation Iron Fist," he began. "Mission is to clear the village of Khost, recover 2 American hostages held by Taliban forces, neutralize enemy combatants. H-hour is 0530 tomorrow. We have air support from Apache elements, ISR coverage from Predator drones, in coordination with Afghan National Army units on the eastern approach." He moved the pointer across the map, tracing routes, identifying checkpoints, establishing phase lines. The brief was thorough, professional, the product of 4 decades of experience distilled into PowerPoint slides and tactical graphics. Brennan had briefed operations in the jungles of Vietnam, the deserts of Iraq, the mountains of Afghanistan. The technology changed. The fundamental mathematics of violence remained constant. Then he reached the casualty collection point. Medical assets will establish CCP here, 3.5 kilometers behind the line of departure. All casualties will be evacuated to this position for treatment in medevac. Captain Martinez raised her hand. She sat in the 3rd row, combat medic badge on her chest, quiet confidence in her posture. "Sir, request permission to establish a forward treatment point 800 meters behind the assault line." The room went quiet. Everyone understood they were watching something that had been building for weeks, maybe months, finally come to a head. Brennan looked at her without expression, denied. Martinez stood, Sir, I have data from similar operations in Fallujah, Marja, and Sangin showing that forward medical positioning reduces mortality rates by 40% in high-intensity combat. Captain, this is not a debate. Medical personnel will remain at the designated CCP. That is my decision. With respect, sir, soldiers will die during the transport time that could be saved with immediate intervention. With respect, Captain, more soldiers will die if medical assets are exposed to enemy fire and killed before they can treat anyone. The silence in the room had weight now, pressure, the feeling of air before a thunderstorm. Other officers looked between Brennan and Martinez, reading the subtext, understanding that this was about more than just tactical positioning. This was old war meeting new war, experience meeting data, fear meeting courage, and neither side willing to concede ground. My experience, Brennan continued, his voice level but hard, tells me that placing medics in the kill zone results in dead medics and no one to treat the casualties that follow. We will proceed with the CCP at the designated position. Are there any other questions? There were no other questions. Martinez sat down. The brief continued, but something had cracked, some invisible line drawn, and everyone in the room knew it. Some of the younger officers looked at Martinez with sympathy. Some of the older NCOs looked at Brennan with understanding. Both sides believed they were right. War would determine which beliefs survived contact with reality. After the brief, O'Brien found Martinez in the medical supply tent, checking inventory with more force than necessary. She was throwing packages of gauze into a crate, like she was angry at the gauze specifically. He did not mean to disrespect your expertise, O'Brien said. Martinez did not stop working, didn't he? He means to keep you alive. By keeping me too far away to do my job? O'Brien was quiet for a moment, watching her work, trying to find words that would bridge a gap he was not sure could be bridged. Emily, can I tell you something? Off the record? She stopped, looked at him. Go ahead. The colonel lost his entire squad in Vietnam. Quang Tri Province, 1971. He was 17 years old. 12 men died waiting for medevac because command would not send the bird into hot area. He held their hands while they bled out. Martinez felt something shift in her chest, some small crack in the armor of certainty. I did not know he was in Vietnam. He lied about his age to enlist. Served there, then Gulf War, then back for Iraq, then here. He has been at war for 41 years. Most of my career, he has been deployed somewhere. That does not make him right about this. No, O'Brien agreed. It just makes him terrified of being wrong. Martinez returned to her inventory. O'Brien watched her for a moment longer, then left. Outside the tent, Captain Rebecca Chen waited, tablet in hand, expression neutral. Chen was the battalion intelligence officer, 36 years old, daughter of Vietnamese refugees who had fled Saigon in 1975. She understood the weight of history better than most. Her parents had stories about American soldiers, about what happened when the war ended, about evacuations that came too late for some and just in time for others. Did you tell her? Chen asked quietly. O'Brien shook his head. Not everything. Chen looked at her tablet screen, at the classified file she had been reviewing for the past hour. The file from Baghdad, 2019. The file that explained why Martinez pushed so hard for forward positioning. The file that showed what happened the last time she got her way. We are all carrying ghosts, Chen said. Some ghosts are heavier than others, O'Brien replied, and some ghosts talk to each other across decades. Brennan's ghosts from 1971 are arguing with Martinez's ghost from 2004. Neither of them can hear the present for all the noise from the past. 3 weeks before Operation Iron Fist, the convoy rolled out of Phobe Pamir at 0600 on a routine resupply mission. Routine, that word again, that lie soldiers told themselves so they could function in places where nothing was ever truly routine. Lieutenant Andrew Brennan rode in the third vehicle, 29 years old, Ranger qualified, trying very hard not to think about the fact that his father was the battalion commander and everyone knew it. He had worked twice as hard as everyone else to earn his position, to prove he was not riding his father's reputation, to demonstrate that nepotism played no role in his career. The universe did not care about his demonstrations. Martinez had requested to ride in the lead Humvee, 8-bag ready, arguing that immediate response time in the event of contact could make the difference between a soldier keeping a limb or losing it. Brennan Sr. had ordered her to remain in the rear vehicle, stating that medical personnel would not be unnecessarily exposed to risk. They argued about it in front of the entire convoy. Martinez made her case with data and passion. Brennan made his decision with rank and experience. Martinez rode in the rear vehicle. Some arguments could not be won, only endured. The IED was buried under a culvert at grid coordinate November Kilo 482 73491, a string of numbers that would be written in after-action reports and casualty notifications in the private nightmares of everyone in that convoy. The lead Humvee hit the pressure plate at 0623. The explosion lifted the vehicle 2 feet in the air and set it back down on fire. 2 soldiers in the lead vehicle took the worst of it: compound fractures, internal bleeding, the kind of injuries where minutes mattered more than morphine. Martinez was 400 meters back, already running before the smoke cleared, aid bag bouncing against her hip, breath coming hard in the thin Afghan air. She covered those 400 meters in under 2 minutes, which was fast, which was professional, which was not fast enough. By the time she reaches the casualties, 8 minutes had passed since detonation. 8 minutes of bleeding, of shock setting in, of the body making decisions about which organs were essential and which could be sacrificed to keep the heart pumping a little longer. Martinez worked with every skill she possessed: tourniquets, pressure bandages, IV lines, constant communication with the medevac bird. She saved one soldier's life. The other soldier lost his leg, an amputation that might have been avoided with immediate intervention, that might have been prevented if she had been in the lead vehicle like she requested. The soldier screamed at her while she worked. "Where were you? Why were you not here? Why?" Martinez had no answer. She had been following orders. Orders, it turned out, were not an adequate response to a 19-year-old who would never walk without a prosthetic again. Orders did not stop the screaming. Orders did not restore what was lost. Orders were just words spoken by men who were not present when the mathematics of trauma rewrote a life in the span of seconds. The aftermath of the convoy incident created a divide in the battalion that had nothing to do with rank or age and everything to do with philosophy. Soldiers began choosing sides, not explicitly, not openly, but in the small ways that revealed where loyalties lay. Who they ate with in the chow hall, who they avoided during downtime, who they believed held responsibility for the amputation. Specialist Washington found himself torn. He respected Brennan, admired the old warrior's bearing and experience, and the quiet competence that came from 4 decades in uniform. But he also trusted Martinez, believed in her passion and skill, and the way she fought for every life with the intensity of someone who had personal stakes in the outcome. Late one night, he found Chaplain Lieutenant Samuel Rhodes sitting outside the chapel tent, looking at stars that were probably the same stars men had looked at since war began. Rhodes was 62, which made him ancient by military standards, a Vietnam veteran himself who had been there for the end, for the helicopters lifting off from embassy roofs while the world watched. He had his own ghosts. They kept him company on sleepless nights. "What do you do, sir?" Washington asked, "when both sides are right?" Rhodes was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You recognize that war does not have right answers, only hard choices. And you pray that whoever is making those choices has the wisdom to understand the difference. But how do you know which choice is right? You do not. Not until later. Sometimes not until decades later. Sometimes never." "That is not very comforting, sir." Rhodes smiled, a sad expression in the starlight. "No, it is not. But it is honest. And honesty is what we owe each other when we have nothing else to give." Washington thought about that. Then he asked, "Were you there, sir, with the colonel in Vietnam?" Rhodes nodded slowly. "I was there. Different unit, but same province. Quang Tri, 1971. We all lost people in those operations. Some of us lost everyone. How do you live with that?" Rhodes looked at the sky again. "One day at a time. And some days you do not live with it. Some days it lives with you, and you just try not to let it drive." The classified file sat on Captain Chen's encrypted laptop, the kind of file that should have been buried deeper, that should have required more clearance to access. But Chen had friends in personnel and a talent for asking the right questions in the right way. The file was from Baghdad, 2019, and it detailed an incident involving then-Lieutenant Emily Martinez during her second deployment. Chen read it 3 times, trying to decide what to do with the information. O'Brien knew about it. That much was clear from his careful conversations, his measured responses when Martinez's tactics came up. But did Brennan know? And if he did not, should he? The incident had occurred during a joint patrol with Iraqi army forces. Martinez had advocated for splitting medical assets, putting one team forward with the lead element. The patrol commander had initially agreed, deviating from standard doctrine based on Martinez's passionate argument and the success of similar tactics in previous operations. The patrol encountered light resistance from insurgent forces. Martinez's forward team responded immediately, treating 2 wounded Iraqi soldiers within minutes of contact. It seemed to validate everything she believed about aggressive medical positioning. Then the real ambush hit. Larger force, better position, targeting specifically the locations where the forward teams had established themselves. The insurgents had been watching, learning, adapting. They knew where the medics would be. Staff Sergeant Ryan Cooper died trying to protect Martinez's position. He was a combat medic himself, 10 years of service, a wife and 2 kids waiting in Kentucky. He died because he was forward, because the doctrine that Brennan insisted on following existed for reasons written in blood across multiple wars. The after-action report concluded tactical error due to insufficient intelligence. Martinez received an official reprimand, removed from her record after 2 years. But the reprimand did not capture the nights she could not sleep. The dreams where she watched Cooper take rounds meant for her, the guilt that drove her to push harder, train better, save more lives to somehow balance the equation. O'Brien appeared beside Chen without her hearing him approach. He had a talent for that, moving quietly despite his size. "You found it," he said, not a question. Chen closed the laptop. "Does the colonel know?" "No, and I would like to keep it that way." "Why?" "Because if he knows Martinez got someone killed the last time she pushed for forward positioning, this conversation ends. He will never trust her judgment. And she is a good officer, Rebecca. She made a mistake. She has been trying to atone for it ever since. By making the same argument that got Cooper killed, by refusing to let fear stop her from doing what she believes is right. There is a difference." Chen wanted to argue, wanted to push back, but she understood what O'Brien was protecting. Not Martinez specifically, but the idea that soldiers could make mistakes and still be worth following. War was complicated. People were complicated. The space between right and wrong was where most of life actually happened. "How do we prevent this from happening again?" Chen asked. "We do not," O'Brien said. "We just try to be ready when it does." Lieutenant Andrew Brennan met with Martinez in the medical tent 2 days after the convoy incident. He came alone, without his rank, without the weight of being the colonel's son. He came as someone who had questions that needed honest answers. "Captain," he began, then stopped. "Ma'am, can I speak freely?" Martinez looked up from the medical journal she was reviewing. "You can. Why do you push so hard for forward positioning? And do not tell me it is just about response times. This is personal for you." Andrew's directness surprised her. Most officers danced around questions, wrapped them in military courtesy and professional distance. She decided he deserved an honest answer. "My brother," she said, "Daniel, Marine Corporal, killed in Fallujah, 2004. Took 30 minutes for medevac to reach his position. He had 28 minutes of blood." Andrew was quiet, processing this. "I am sorry. Everyone is sorry. Sorry does not change the arithmetic. Faster response equals more soldiers alive. It is that simple." "Is it, though? Is it really that simple?" Martinez set down her journal. "What do you mean?" Andrew pulled a photograph from his pocket. It showed a young man in jungle fatigues, 17, 18 maybe, surrounded by 12 others. All of them smiling at something the camera could not see. "My father," Andrew said. "Vietnam, 1971, Quang Tri Province. He was 17, lied about his age to enlist. Every single one of these other men died that day waiting for medevac. He held their hands while they bled out because command would not send helicopters into the hot zone." Martinez stared at the photograph, seeing her enemy in a different light, seeing not stubbornness, but trauma, not resistance, but terror. "I did not know," she said quietly. "He does not talk about it. Ever. But every tactical decision he makes, every position he establishes, every order he gives about medical positioning, he is seeing those 12 faces. He is trying to prevent that from happening again. By preventing me from doing my job? By preventing you from dying in a kill zone and leaving everyone else without a surgeon. Captain, I am not saying he is right. I am saying he has reasons. Heavy reasons." Martinez took the photograph, studied the young faces, tried to imagine what it felt like to be 17 and watch 12 men die while help circled overhead. She handed the picture back. "We are fighting the same war from opposite sides," she said. Maybe that is the real problem, Andrew replied. Maybe we should be fighting the same war from the same side. How do we do that when we cannot agree on the fundamentals? Andrew stood to leave. I do not know, ma'am, but I hope we figure it out before Operation Iron Fist, because I have a feeling that mission is going to test everything we believe. He was right. He just did not know how right. 2 nights before the operation, Martinez could not sleep. She lay in her bunk, staring at the plywood ceiling, running scenarios, calculating response times, trying to find the mathematical proof that would convince Brennan her approach was correct. Numbers did not lie. Data did not have emotions. If she could just present the case clearly enough, rationally enough, he would have to see. But she knew in the part of her brain that understood humans better than statistics that this was not about data. It never had been. This was about two people carrying the same ghost from opposite perspectives, about brother dying too slow and squad dying too slow, about the impossible calculus of saving lives when saving lives required risking lives. She got up, walked to the operations center. Chen was there, working late on intelligence prep. Maps covered the walls, drone footage played on silent screens, the choreography of violence rendered in pixels and topographic lines. Cannot sleep? Chen asked. Too much in my head. Chen gestured at the maps. Want to walk through the plan? Sometimes it helps to see it from different angles. They spent an hour reviewing routes, discussing enemy patterns, identifying likely ambush positions. Chen was thorough, professional, the kind of intelligence officer who understood that information saved lives. But there was something else, something she was not saying. What is it? Martinez asked. You have that look. What look? The look that says you know something I should know. Chen hesitated, then made a decision. She pulled up a file on her laptop, classified, restricted. She turned the screen so Martinez could see. Baghdad, 2019, your after-action report from the patrol where Staff Sergeant Cooper was killed. Martinez felt ice form in her chest. You read that? I read it. And I know why you push so hard now. You are trying to prove you were right. That forward positioning works despite what happened. I was right. The intel was wrong. Maybe. Or maybe both things are true. Maybe your tactic works when intel is good. And maybe it gets people killed when intel is bad. Which is the problem with war, Emily. Intel is always incomplete. Always. Martinez stared at the screen, at the words that had haunted her for 4 years. Tactical error, insufficient intelligence, preventable casualty. Does Brennan know about this? She asked. No, O'Brien has kept it quiet. Why? Because he believes you are a good officer who made a mistake, and he does not want that mistake to define your entire career. Martinez closed the laptop. I need some air. She walked outside into the Afghan night. The stars were brilliant, unconcerned with human conflict, shining on the same ground where empires had bled for thousands of years. She thought about Cooper, about his kids who would grow up without a father, about choices that seemed right until they were revealed to be wrong. O'Brien found her there, sitting on a concrete barrier, looking at nothing. Chen told you, he said. Not a question. Martinez nodded. O'Brien sat beside her. For what it is worth, I meant what I told her. You are a good officer. Cooper's death was not your fault. Whose fault was it then? The wars, the insurgents, bad intel. Take your pick, but not yours. I advocated for the positioning that exposed him. And you have saved dozens of lives since using similar tactics. Do those lives count less because of one bad outcome? Martinez had no answer to that. They sat in silence. Two professionals caught between doctrine and innovation, between fear and courage, between the soldiers they were trying to save and the soldiers they had failed to save. Operation goes at 0530, O'Brien finally said. Brennan is not going to change his mind about medical positioning. I know. Are you going to follow his orders? Martinez was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I took an oath to do no harm. Sometimes I wonder if following orders that get soldiers killed violates that oath. And sometimes following your instincts gets soldiers killed. Cooper proves that. So what is the answer? There is no answer. There is only the next decision. And the one after that, and eventually you have enough decisions behind you that they start to look like a career or a graveyard, depending on how lucky you were. That is a terrible philosophy. O'Brien smiled sadly. It is the only philosophy that survives contact with reality. The morning of Operation Iron Fist arrived with the kind of silence that only comes before violence. Soldiers checked weapons, reviewed procedures, wrote letters they hoped would never be mailed. Chaplain Rhodes moved among them, offering prayers and quiet words, understanding that some men needed permission to be afraid and others needed permission to be brave. Brennan conducted final equipment checks with O'Brien, both of them moving through rituals perfected over decades. They did not discuss Martinez or positioning or the tension that had been building. They discussed ammunition counts and radio frequencies and the practical details that kept soldiers alive when philosophy failed. Martinez prepared her medical team with the same intensity she brought to everything. She briefed her medics on expected casualty patterns, reviewed emergency procedures, ensured everyone knew their role. She did not mention Brennan's orders or her disagreement with them. She focused on the work, because the work was all that mattered when the shooting started. Andrew gathered his platoon for a final brief. 23 men, average age 24, most on their first deployment, trusting him to make decisions that would bring them home. He looked at their faces and saw his father's squad from Vietnam, saw the ghost that waited for all of them, saw the terrible weight of command. Washington stood in formation with his squad, M4 carbine held at low ready, trying to control the fear that tasted like copper in the back of his throat. This would be his first real combat operation. The transition from training to reality, from simulation to consequence. He looked toward the medical tent and saw Martinez checking her aid bag one final time. The sun rose. The clock counted down. History prepared to repeat itself or diverge or simply continue its indifferent march forward. At 0530 minutes before H hour, O'Brien approached Brennan with news. Chen had intercepted communications suggesting enemy activity in the target area was heavier than initially estimated. Not enough to abort the mission, but enough to warrant caution. Brennan studied the updated intelligence, making calculations that were part mathematics and part instinct. He increased the CCP distance from 3.5 kilometers to 4 kilometers. More safety margin, more response time, more soldiers bleeding while help traveled. The same decision commanders had made in Vietnam when Brennan was 17. The same decision that had killed 12 men. The same decision that had haunted him for 52 years. Martinez received the update over radio. Her jaw tightened. She said nothing. There was nothing to say. The operation was minutes from launch when Brennan walked to the medical staging area. Martinez stood beside her Humvee, aid bag loaded, team ready. They looked at each other across the space between commander and subordinate, between Vietnam and Iraq, between doctrine written in one war's blood and innovation written in another's. "Captain," Brennan said. His voice was quiet, almost lost in the sound of engines starting, of helicopters spooling up, of a battalion preparing for violence. "Sir, I need you to understand something. The position I have established for the CCP, it is not because I doubt your skill or your courage. It is because I have watched too many medics die, and when they me, everyone else dies slower." Martinez met his eyes. "I understand, sir. I just disagree." "I know, but you will follow orders." It was not a question. Martinez nodded once, sharp, military. "I will follow orders." Brennan studied her face, seeing something of himself in her certainty, in her absolute conviction that she was right. He wondered if he had looked like that at 17, before Vietnam taught him that certainty was just another word for ignorance. "Good hunting, Captain." "You too, sir." Brennan walked away. The sun continued rising. In 24 hours, 5 shots would be fired. That would change everything. But in that moment, in the golden light of the Afghan dawn, there was only the mission, only the work, only the next decision waiting to be made. 0530 approached. The battalion rolled out. And somewhere in the mathematics of war, in the calculus of blood and time and impossible choices, the universe prepared to render its verdict on 2 people who were both right, both wrong, and both about to learn that war does not grade on intentions. It grades on outcomes. And outcomes care nothing for good intentions or heavy histories or the ghosts that commanders carry. The convoy rolled through the pre-dawn darkness like a steel snake moving through ancient dust. Brennan sat in the command Humvee, radio headset pressed against his ear, listening to the chatter of 200 soldiers preparing to walk into violence. The sounds were familiar, comforting in their routine. Weapons check, comms check, final accountability of personnel and equipment. The symphony of war played the same notes it had played in Vietnam, in Iraq, and every godforsaken piece of ground where men decided other men needed to die. 36 hours before H hour, before the shooting started, before everything changed. Brennan stood in the operations center reviewing the plan for the 11th time, looking for the flaw that would kill soldiers if he missed it. Chen stood beside him, tablet glowing in the dim light, showing drone footage of the target village. Mud walls and compounds, narrow streets that turned routine patrols into shooting galleries. The kind of terrain that had swallowed armies since Alexander the Great decided Afghanistan was worth conquering. Sir, Chen said quietly, updated intelligence shows increased cell phone activity in the target area. Could be civilians, could be enemy, coordinating. Brennan studied the heat signatures on the thermal imagery. How increased? 30% above baseline for this time of day. Recommendation? Chen chose her words carefully. Sir, recommend we push CCP back to 4 kilometers. Give us more standoff if this turns into a sustained fight. Brennan nodded slowly. He was already thinking the same thing. More distance meant more safety for the medical assets. It also meant more time for wounded soldiers to bleed. The mathematics never balanced. There was no equation that solved for everyone living. He had learned that in 1971 watching 12 men die in Quang Tri province. The lesson had not become less true in 52 years. Make it so, he said, 4 kilometers, and tell Martinez. Chen hesitated. Sir, she is not going to like this. I am not in the business of being liked, Captain. I am in the business of bringing soldiers home. Yes, sir. After Chen left, O'Brien entered the operations center, carrying 2 cups of coffee that had been sitting on a burner too long. He handed one to Brennan without comment. They stood together looking at the maps, drinking bad coffee, carrying the weight of other men's lives in silence. Pat, Brennan said after a long moment, if this goes wrong tomorrow, it will not go wrong. If it does, if I make the wrong call, you will tell me, you will not let me get soldiers killed because I am too stubborn to see clearly. O'Brien was quiet, understanding they were talking about more than just Operation Iron Fist. They were talking about Quang Tri and Baghdad and all the missions where commanders made choices and soldiers paid the bill. Jim, you have kept more soldiers alive over 40 years than most commanders see in their entire careers. Your judgment is sound. My judgment is 69 years old, and it remembers things that did not work. Sometimes I wonder if I am making decisions for this war or the last one. Then trust the people around you. Trust Chen's intel. Trust Martinez's medicine. Trust that the Army has learned something since 1971. Brennan almost smiled. You sound like a chaplain. Rhodes is rubbing off on me. God help us all. They finished their coffee. Outside, soldiers conducted final rehearsals, running through actions on contact, practicing casualty evacuation procedures, doing the work that kept chaos from becoming catastrophe. Brennan watched them through the window. Young men who trusted him to make the right decisions, who believed that experience and rank somehow translated to wisdom. Pat, Brennan said, there is something I need to tell you about Quang Tri. I know the story, Jim. No, you know the version I told. You do not know the truth. O'Brien waited. Brennan stared into his empty coffee cup like it held answers. When the corpsman was begging for medevac, when he was screaming into the radio that the men could not wait, I was the one who told him to shut up and wait for orders. I was 17 years old, and I thought I knew better. I thought following protocol would keep us alive. You were 17, you were not in command. I was the senior survivor after the first burst killed the sergeant and the LT. For 8 minutes, I was in command, and I told that corpsman to wait. By the time I changed my mind, by the time I started screaming for the bird myself, it was too late. They died waiting for me to understand that sometimes you break the rules or everyone dies. O'Brien absorbed this, understanding now why Brennan held so tightly to doctrine, why he refused to deviate from established procedures. He was not protecting soldiers from enemy fire. He was protecting them from himself, from the memory of being 17 and wrong and responsible for 12 corpses. That is why you will not let Martinez push forward, O'Brien said. You think if you bend the rules, soldiers die. Because that is what happened to you. That is what happened because of me. There is a difference. And you have been carrying that for 52 years. Brennan set down his cup. Some weights do not get lighter with time, Pat. They just become part of your skeleton. You learn to walk with them, or you stop walking. O'Brien thought about his own father, the corpsman who had tried to save Brennan's squad, the legacy of medical courage that had shaped his entire understanding of service. He thought about Martinez, carrying her brother's death, trying to prove that aggressive intervention could rewrite the ending. He thought about all of them, trapped between past and present, between trauma and duty, trying to find the narrow path that led to tomorrow. Jim, he said carefully, I need to tell you something about my father. I know he died in Vietnam. You have mentioned it. He died in your operation. Quang Tri Province, February 1971. Navy corpsman attached to Marine elements providing flank security. He was one of the medics waiting for clearance to enter the LZ and treat your squad. Brennan turned slowly, the mathematics of history clicking into place. Your father. Hospital corpsman, second class Gerald O'Brien. He was one of 3 corpsmen in the medevac bird. When they finally got clearance to land, when they found everyone dead, my father stayed behind with the bodies while the bird took off for fuel. He stayed alone with 12 dead soldiers in that valley for 40 minutes until they could come back for him and the remains. He never talked about what that was like, but it killed something in him. He drank himself to death by 1985. Brennan felt the ground shift beneath him, understanding now why O'Brien had stayed with him for 20 years, why he mediated between command and medical, why he understood both sides of the argument that was tearing the battalion apart. Pat, I am sorry. I did not know. How could you? I barely knew myself until I found his service records after he died. But here is what I learned from those records, from piecing together his story. He blamed himself for not being there sooner. He believed that if command had sent them in immediately, he could have saved some of your squad. He carried that guilt until it poisoned everything. But command was right to wait. The area was hot. They would have been killed. Maybe. Or maybe they would have saved someone. The point is, he never knew. And not knowing destroyed him. Jim, you and Martinez are arguing about the same thing my father and your command argued about 52 years ago. And neither side has the answer because there is no answer. There are just choices and consequences, and soldiers trying to live with both. Brennan absorbed this, feeling the weight of history pressing down, understanding that the argument between doctrine and innovation was older than either of them, written in blood across every war since men first organized violence into units and tactics. What do I do with that information, Pat? You remember that Martinez is not wrong just because you are not wrong. You remember that this war is not the same as that war. And you trust that we have all learned something in the last 50 years. And if we have not, then we learn it again, the hard way, like we always do. They stood in silence, 2 old soldiers carrying history, trying to figure out how to move forward when the past kept pulling them backward. Outside, the night continued its indifferent march toward dawn. The mission timer counted down. In 36 hours, everything would change. Martinez conducted her final medical brief at 0200, 6 hours before H hour, speaking to 8 combat medics and 15 soldiers with combat lifesaver training. Washington sat in the front row, taking notes, trying to absorb everything that might keep someone alive when doctrine met reality. Listen carefully, Martinez said, because I am only going to say this once. Our CCP is 4 kilometers behind the line of departure. That is a long distance. That is time. Every second of that time is blood. Your job, all of your jobs, is to buy time. Tourniquets stop arterial bleeding. Pressure bandages control venous bleeding. Chest seals prevent tension pneumothorax. You are not trying to cure anyone. You are trying to keep them alive long enough for them to reach me. She showed slides, demonstrated techniques, drilled procedures until her team could perform them while wearing gloves in the dark with someone shooting at them. This was not medical school. This was battlefield mathematics rendered in blood and gauze, and the desperate hope that training would hold when everything else fell apart. Washington raised his hand. Ma'am, what if we cannot evacuate? What if the route is cut off? Then you continue treatment on site and call for alternate extraction. Ground convoy, helicopter, whatever works. You do not wait. You do not pause. You fight to keep them alive until help arrives or they die. Those are the only 2 options. What if we are the casualties, ma'am? What if medical goes down? Then everyone with combat lifesaver training comes the medical asset. That is why all of you are here. That is why we train everyone. In war, the only certainty is that the plan will fail. Our job is to have enough redundancy that failure does not equal death. She dismissed them at 0300. They filtered out into the darkness, each carrying the weight of responsibility, understanding that their hands might be the last thing wounded soldiers felt, their voices the last thing dying soldiers heard. Washington lingered, wanting to ask a question he could not quite formulate. Specialist, Martinez said, what is on your mind? Washington struggled to find words. Ma'am, how do you deal with it? The pressure? Knowing that people live or die based on what you do? Martinez was quiet for a moment, remembering her brother, remembering Cooper, remembering all the faces that haunted the space between sleep and waking. "You accept that you will make mistakes," she finally said. "You accept that you will do everything right and soldiers will still die. You accept that war is not fair and medicine is not magic, and sometimes the universe just decides today is someone's day to die. And then you work anyway. You fight anyway. Because the alternative is giving up. And giving up means everyone dies instead of just some." "That is pretty dark, ma'am." "Welcome to war, specialist. It does not get lighter." Washington left. Martinez sat alone in the medical tent, looking at her aid bag, checking equipment for the third time because checking equipment was something she could control when everything else was chaos. Her phone held a picture of Daniel, smiling in his Marine uniform, young and confident and already dead even though the picture did not know it yet. She wondered what he would think of her now, what he would say about her argument with Brennan, whether he would be proud or disappointed or simply sad that she was still fighting the war that killed him. O'Brien found her there at 0400, 1 hour before H hour. He sat down without asking permission, moving with the ease of someone who had earned the right to ignore military courtesy. "Emily," he said, "I told Brennan about my father." Martinez looked up. "Why?" "Because he needs to understand that his trauma is not unique, that we are all carrying ghosts, and that sometimes the only way to move forward is to acknowledge the past instead of being controlled by it." "Did it help?" "I do not know, but it was true, and truth matters even when it does not help." Martinez nodded slowly. "Pat, if this goes wrong tomorrow, if I am right and soldiers die because we are too far back, then you will carry that. Same as if you are wrong and soldiers die because we are too far forward. Command is not about being right, Emily. It is about making the best decision you can with incomplete information and living with the consequences." "I am not sure I can do that." "You already have." Baghdad, 2019. Staff Sergeant Cooper. "You made a decision, it went wrong, and you are still here, still fighting, still trying to save lives. That is not weakness, that is courage." Martinez felt tears threatening, pushed them back. Crying was a luxury she could not afford with H hour approaching. "How did you know about Cooper?" "Chen found the file. I asked her to bury it." "Why?" "Because you are a good officer who made a mistake. And good officers who learn from mistakes become great officers. I need you to become great, Emily. This battalion needs you to become great. The soldiers in the vehicles tomorrow need you to become great. What if I am not? Then you will fail spectacularly, and we will all figure out what to do next. But I do not think you will fail. I think you will do exactly what you have been trained to do, and soldiers will live because of it. And the ones who die will die in war, which is what war does. It kills soldiers. Our job is to minimize the killing, not eliminate it. Anyone who tells you different is selling something." They sat in silence, two professionals on the eve of violence, trying to find courage in each other because courage alone was never enough. Outside, engines started, soldiers formed up, the battalion prepared to move. 0530 approached like a verdict. Each hour arrived with the inevitability of sunrise. The battalion moved out in tactical column, vehicles spaced for security, air assets overhead providing overwatch. The coordinated violence of modern warfare rendered in diesel engines and radio chatter and young men trying to control their fear. The village of Coast materialized in the dawn light like something from another century. Mud walls, compound architecture, narrow streets that had witnessed war since before America existed. Somewhere in those compounds, 2 American hostages waited for rescue, bound and guarded by men who believed that killing was the path to paradise. The assault element moved through the village methodically, clearing structures, securing intersections, encountering light resistance that faded before contact could develop into sustained fighting. It was textbook, almost boring, the kind of operation that made commanders nervous because boring meant they were missing something. Andrews QRF held position northeast of the village. 3 vehicles, 30 soldiers, waiting for orders that hopefully would never come. He watched the village through binoculars, tracked the assault element's progress on his tactical display, tried to convince himself that boring was good, that boring meant everyone went home. Then he saw them. Taliban fighters, maybe 8 or 10, moving through a wadi 600 meters east of the village, moving with purpose, moving to flank the assault element, moving to cut off the primary exfiltration route. Antidrew keyed his radio. Wildcat 6, this is Raptor 2. I have enemy dismounts moving to cut off Route Alpha. Request permission to interdict. Brennan's voice came back immediately, calm, authoritative, the voice of 4 decades giving orders. Raptor 2 negative. Hold your position. Main element will handle it. Sir, they are about to be in position to ambush our exfil. We can stop them now. Raptor 2, I said hold position. That is a direct order. Do not engage unless engage first. Andrew watched the Taliban fighters continue moving. Watch them reach a position that overlooked Route Alpha. Watch them disappear into spider holes and fighting positions that would turn the exfil into a shooting gallery. He thought about his father's instructions, follow orders exactly, no improvisation. He thought about the soldiers in the village who would drive into that ambush if someone did not act. He thought about being right versus being obedient. His hand moved to the radio, then stopped. Something felt wrong, not about the tactical situation, but about his own certainty. Was he seeing clearly, or was he seeing what he wanted to see, an opportunity to prove himself, to show the old man that initiative mattered? Sir, Andrew said carefully into the radio, recommend we move to interdict. They are going to hit our guys on the way out. Raptor 2, recommendation noted. Order stands, hold position. Andrew's driver looked at him, waiting for orders. His platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant Craig Thompson, 34 years old, 3 combat tours, sensed the decision forming. Sir, Thompson said quietly. And Andrew made a choice. Later, he would not be entirely sure it was his choice. Later, lying in a hospital bed with traumatic brain injury, he would replay this moment and wonder if he really said what he thought he said. If memory was reliable, if the explosion had rewritten not just his present, but his past. We are moving, Andrew said. Sir, the colonel said. I know what he said. We are moving anyway. Those are our brothers down there. Mount up. The 3 Humvees rolled out of position, moving east toward the Wadi, toward the Taliban fighters, toward the decision that would change everything. Andrew justified it to himself with doctrine, with initiative, with the principle that junior officers were empowered to exploit opportunities. He did not admit, could not admit, that he was also trying to prove something to his father, trying to demonstrate that the new generation understood war better than the old one. The Taliban fighters never saw them coming. Andrew's element engaged from 600 meters, suppressing the positions, forcing the enemy to abandon their ambush before it could be sprung. It was textbook, perfect, exactly the kind of aggressive action that saved friendly forces and destroyed enemy plans. It was also the bait. The RPG team had been waiting in a position offset from the initial fighters, waiting for exactly this response, counting on American aggression to bring vehicles into the kill zone. They fired 3 rockets in rapid succession. The first missed. The second impacted Andrew's Humvee on the driver's side, lifting the vehicle and slamming it down with the casual violence of physics applied to war. The world became noise and smoke and pain. Andrew felt himself thrown against his harness, felt the vehicle roll, felt things breaking that were probably bones, but felt distant and unimportant compared to the overwhelming fact of still being conscious, still being able to think, still being fundamentally alive, even if alive hurt worse than he had imagined possible. Radio traffic exploded. Raptor 2 is hit. Multiple casualties. Need medevac now. Grid November Kilo 48273-491. In the command vehicle, Brennan felt his heart stop. His son's call sign, his son's position, his son who had disobeyed orders and driven into an ambush because he was 29 years old and thought he knew better. Or had he disobeyed? Brennan replayed the radio transmission in his mind. Andrew had requested permission. Brennan had denied it. What happened after that? Brennan keyed the radio with hands that wanted to shake, but could not be allowed to shake. All Wildcat elements, Raptor 2 has casualties. Continue mission. Medevac is inbound. But his mind was in Quang Tri province, watching 12 men bleed out, watching the corpsmen beg for help that came too late. Except now the bleeding was his son. Now the choices were about Andrew dying or Andrew living based on decisions Brennan would make in the next 60 seconds. Get me a sit rep on Raptor 2, he ordered Chen. How bad? Chen was already pulling drone footage. Sir, vehicle is destroyed. I count 3 bodies on the ground. 2 moving, 1 not moving. Unclear which one is Lieutenant Brennan. Casualties? Unknown. Standby. The combat medic at the scene, Specialist Tyler Morrison, was doing triage under fire, moving between broken bodies, making decisions about who could wait and who could not wait, and who was already beyond waiting. He keyed his radio, voice tight with stress, but professional. Wildcat 6, this is Wildcat 7-2. 3 urgent casualties. 1 priority, need immediate CAS evac. We are taking small arms fire from multiple positions. Brennan processed this, made calculations, gave orders. Wildcat 7-2, CAS evac is 30 minutes out. Stabilize and prepare for ground extraction. 30 minutes? Sir, I do not know if they have 30 minutes. Do your job, specialist. Medevac is coming. At the CCP 4 kilometers away, Martinez heard the radio traffic and understood immediately what it meant. Brennan's son was hit. Casualties were critical. 30 minutes was too long. She ran for her Humvee, grabbing her aid bag, yelling for her team to mount up. O'Brien intercepted her at the vehicle. Emily, wait for orders. People are dying, and you will join them if you drive into an active firefight without support. Then get me support. Get me whatever I need, but I am going. Martinez, you cannot. His name is Andrew Pat. He is 29 years old and he is bleeding. Whether he disobeyed orders or followed them or something in between does not matter right now. What matters is he is dying, and I am a doctor. That is all that matters. O'Brien looked at her, saw the determination, saw the guilt, saw someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment to prove that aggressive medical intervention could rewrite history. Take a full security element, he said. Combat formation. Treat it like a tactical movement, not a rescue. You are not a hero driving toward danger. You are an officer executing a mission. Thank you. Do not thank me. Just bring them home. Martinez assembled her team in under 3 minutes. 2 Humvees, 12 soldiers including Washington, combat loaded and ready to move. She briefed them quickly, professionally, focusing on the tactical problem rather than the emotional weight. We have 3 urgent casualties, 2.1 kilometers from here. Area is contested but not overrun. We move fast, we move smart, we establish security, we treat and extract. Questions? There were no questions. They rolled out, leaving the CCP, abandoning the position that Brennan had established to keep them safe. They drove toward gunfire because gunfire meant soldiers needed help, and helping was the only reason any of them had joined. Brennan stood in the command vehicle, watching the blue icon representing Martinez's element moving toward Andrew's position, understanding what she was doing, understanding why, and feeling something inside him split open like old wood under too much pressure. He walked out of the command vehicle into the blazing Afghan sun. Martinez's Humvees were visible in the distance, moving fast, raising dust, moving toward his son, moving against his orders, moving because she believed she was right and he was wrong, and soldiers would die if she did not act. He keyed his radio. Captain Martinez, stop your movement. That is a direct order. Martinez's voice came back, calm, professional, inflexible. Sir, I'm responding to urgent casualty report. 3 soldiers critical. You do not have clearance to move. Area is not secure. Sir, your son is one of those casualties. I am aware, Captain. Order stands. Return to CCP. With respect, sir, I cannot do that. Martinez, you will stop your vehicle or you will face court-martial. Do you understand me? I understand, sir, and I am not stopping. Brennan felt 52 years of control fracture. Felt Quang Tri rising up. Felt the faces of 12 dead men superimpose over his son's face. Felt the terrible certainty that if he let Martinez move forward, she would die and then Andrew would die. And then everyone would die because that was what happened when people broke the rules, when people thought they knew better, when 17-year-old privates made decisions that got everyone killed. He walked toward where Martinez's Humvees had been staged, moving with purpose, moving with something beyond rational thought. Other soldiers watched him, sensed something wrong, began gravitating toward the confrontation that was building like a thunderstorm. Martinez's Humvees had traveled maybe 400 meters when Brennan's voice came over the radio again. Different now, strained, the 70-year-old man unable to hide the 69-year-old terror underneath. Captain Martinez, you will stop your vehicle now. The Humvees stopped. Martinez dismounted, walked back toward Brennan, face set with determination that mirrored his own. They met in the open ground, 40 soldiers forming a loose circle around them, watching their leaders tear each other apart in front of everyone. Sir, Martinez said, people are dying. Your son is dying. I need to go. You need to follow orders. Your orders will kill them. My orders will keep you alive. And if Andrew dies while we argue, then he dies, Brennan said, and something in his voice broke on the words. He dies because he disobeyed orders, because he thought he knew better than I did, because he drove into an ambush. Those are his choices and his consequences. He is your son. He is a soldier. He accepted the risks. Is that what you told the families of your squad in Vietnam? That they accepted the risks? Brennan felt something inside him snap. You do not get to throw that at me. Someone has to. Because you are so trapped in 1971 that you cannot see that this is not the same war. Medicine has changed. Tactics have changed. We can save them if you let me go. And if there is a second ambush, if they are waiting for exactly this, if you drive forward and die, and then no one can treat any casualties, then I die doing my job, which is what soldiers do. Not on my watch, not again, never again. The radio crackled with another transmission from the casualty site. Wildcat 6, this is 7-2. He is coding. I repeat, he is coding. I need a doctor now. That is Andrew, Martinez said, voice rising. That is your son coding. Let me save him. I cannot. Why? Because 12 men died 50 years ago? Because you made a mistake when you were 17? How long are you going to let that control you? It is not control. It is learning. It is understanding that some decisions cannot be undone. And some decisions kill people by doing nothing. They stood 3 feet apart, 2 people carrying impossible weight, screaming at each other about choices that had no good answers, about wars that never ended even when the shooting stopped, about the terrible mathematics of command that required trading lives against doctrine and hoping the equation balanced. I am going, Martinez said finally. Court-martial me if you want. Fire me. Do whatever you need to do. But I am going. She turned toward her vehicle. Brennan's hand moved to his sidearm. O'Brien saw it, understood what was happening, moved to intervene. Jim, do not. But Brennan was not in Afghanistan anymore. He was in Quang Tri province, watching the corpsman run toward wounded men, watching the decision he made as a 17-year-old replay with his son as the casualty, watching 52 years of trying to get it right collapse into the same mistake rendered in different flesh. He drew his M9 pistol. 40 soldiers froze. The universe held its breath. Martinez turned, saw the weapon, did not believe what she was seeing. Sir, she said carefully, what are you doing? Brennan's hands shook. His face was white. Sweat ran down his temples despite the morning cool. He looked at Martinez but saw the corpsman, saw 12 men dying, saw his son bleeding, saw 52 years of guilt and fear and desperate certainty that the only way to keep people alive was to keep them from the killing. You will not go forward, he said, voice barely audible. I have to. You will die, and then Andrew will die, and then they will all die. Or I save them, and we all live. Martinez took a step toward her vehicle. Brennan fired. The shot hit the ground 2 feet in front of Martinez, kicking up dust and gravel, the crack of the pistol impossibly loud in the morning air. Martinez froze. Soldiers scattered, diving for cover, weapons coming up reflexively before training reasserted itself, and they realized their commander was shooting at their medical officer. Stand down, Brennan said. That is a direct order. Martinez looked at him, saw a man completely broken, saw someone who was not making decisions anymore, who was reacting to ghosts, who had become his trauma. I cannot, she said. She started toward the vehicle again. Brennan fired a second time, hitting the tire of the Humvee, the rubber exploding with a sound like a bomb. Martinez broke into a run. She would go on foot if she had to. She would crawl if necessary. Men were dying, and she was a doctor, and nothing else mattered. Brennan fired a third shot. This one passed close enough that Martinez felt the pressure wave, felt the bullet displace air near her head. She dove behind a concrete barrier, heart hammering, mind refusing to process that her commander had just shot at her, had fired a weapon with apparent intent to hit. Washington and 3 other soldiers tackled Brennan from behind, driving him to the ground, wresting the pistol from his hand. The old man fought them, fought with desperate strength, screaming words that were not orders anymore, that were just sounds of breaking. I cannot lose them. I cannot watch them die again. 12 men. I watched 12 men die. I cannot do it again. I cannot. He fired 2 more shots into the air as they wrestled him. Wild shots, rounds going nowhere. The last spasms of control dissolving into chaos. Then the pistol was gone and Brennan was face down in the dust, hands being zip-tied behind his back. Soldiers he had commanded for months looking at him with expressions that ranged from horror to pity to betrayal. Chen stepping forward, voice projecting command despite being 2 ranks junior. I am taking command of this battalion. Secure Colonel Brennan. Captain Martinez, you are cleared to proceed forward. Full security element, combat rules of engagement. Go. Martinez emerged from behind the barrier, shaking, covered in dust, not injured but traumatized in ways that had nothing to do with physical wounds. She looked at Brennan, saw him on the ground, broken, weeping, the ruins of a warrior who had been at war too long. Then she ran for a different vehicle, one with working tires, assembled her team, and drove toward the sound of gunfire because soldiers were dying, and being shot at by her own commander did not change that fundamental fact. The drive to Andrew's position took 8 minutes through contested ground. Martinez's element encountered light small arms fire, returned fire, continued moving. Washington rode in the passenger seat, watching his captain, seeing someone operating on pure professional autopilot, seeing the human being underneath temporarily suspended so the doctor could function. When they reached the crash site, it was worse than reported. Andrew's Humvee was on its side, burning. 3 soldiers lay in a loose perimeter established by Staff Sergeant Thompson and the 2 other survivors from the vehicle. Specialist Morrison knelt beside one casualty, hands red with blood that was not stopping, eyes wide with the knowledge that he was out of his depth. Martinez dismounted before the vehicle stopped moving, hit the ground running, moved to the nearest casualty with her aid bag already open. It was Andrew, unconscious, traumatic head injury visible, breathing shallow, pulse thready. She started assessment, hands moving automatically through checks she had performed hundreds of times. Tension pneumothorax, possible C-spine injury, blood pressure dropping. He needed a trauma bay and a surgical team, and time that he did not have. Washington, I need the advanced airway kit now. Washington was beside her, hands steady despite being under sporadic fire, passing equipment, holding light, doing everything a good assistant did while trying not to look at the 2 other casualties that Martinez had not reached yet. One of them was PFC Joshua Parker, 23 years old, Nebraska farm kid, girlfriend waiting at home, sucking chest wound, the kind Martinez had treated successfully 20 times. Treatable, savable, if she got to him in time. The other was SPC Ryan Mitchell, 26 years old, Detroit, sending money home to his mother every month, massive abdominal trauma, arterial bleeding that Morrison had tried and failed to control, also treatable, also savable, with time and hands and immediate intervention. Martinez worked on Andrew with focused intensity, needle decompression, chest tube insertion, intubation, aggressive fluid resuscitation. She brought him back from the edge, stabilized him enough for transport, called for medevac with the urgency of someone who knew that minutes mattered. Then she moved to Parker. Too late. He had bled out while she worked on Andrew. She checked for pulse that was not there, started CPR that was futile, worked for 5 minutes because that was protocol. Because protocol was what kept the universe from complete chaos. Because admitting he was dead meant accepting that she had chosen who lived and who died. She moved to Mitchell, also gone. Morrison had done everything right. The wounds were just too severe, the bleeding too massive, the time too long. But if she had been there immediately, if the CCP had been 800 meters instead of 4 kilometers, if Brennan had not drawn his weapon and fired 5 shots and delayed her response by critical minutes, these calculations were poison. Martinez knew it. She forced them away, focused on the work, on getting Andrew packaged for medevac, on preparing the bodies of Parker and Mitchell for transport, on being a professional when being a professional was the only thing standing between sanity and complete breakdown. The medevac bird arrived, loaded Andrew and the walking wounded, departed in rotor wash and dust. Martinez sat in the blood-soaked dirt beside the 2 bodies, looking at faces that had been alive 3 hours ago, that had trusted her to keep them that way, that had died while she chose to save someone else. Washington sat beside her, silent, understanding that some moments had no words. "Ma'am," he finally said, "you saved Lieutenant Brennan." "I killed them," Martinez replied. "I chose. Andrew over Parker, Andrew over Mitchell. I chose the commander's son and let them die. You chose the closest casualty with the most treatable injuries. I chose wrong. There was no right choice. There were 3 casualties and 1 surgeon. Someone was always going to die. That does not make it easier." "No, ma'am, it does not." They sat in silence. The radio reported that Operation Iron Fist was complete, hostages recovered, enemy neutralized, Mission success. 4 friendly KIA. One of them was still incoming. 2 of them lay at Martinez's feet. The 4th had died somewhere else in the operation, rendered statistical, not personal, not yet mourned. Chen's voice came over the radio, calm, professional, doing the job that needed doing. All Wildcat elements. Operation Iron Fist is complete. Begin phase line movement for exfil. CAS evac is inbound for remaining wounded. All commanders ensure accountability of personnel and equipment. Martinez keyed her radio. Wildcat 6, this is Wildcat 7 actual. 2 urgent KIA ready for transport. Request priority KCAS evac for remains. Roger 7 actual. Bird is 5 mics out. I need you to return to base for debrief. Understood. 7 actual out. Martinez looked at Parker and Mitchell one more time, tried to memorize their faces, tried to find words that would mean something to their families, tried to understand how she would live with this choice. She found no answers. Only the certainty that she would carry them, same as Brennan carried Quang Tri, same as everyone who survived war carried the ones who did not. Washington helped her to her feet. They walked to the vehicle. Behind them, Chaplain Rhodes had arrived, was kneeling beside the bodies, saying prayers that probably did not change anything but needed to be said anyway. The drive back to Fort Pamir was silent. Martinez looked at her hands, still covered in blood, and wondered whose it was. Andrews, Parker's, Mitchell's, all of them. The blood of choices rendered in screaming metal and failing bodies and the terrible arithmetic of triage. When they reached the base, Chen was waiting. She had secured Brennan in the detention facility, established temporary command, initiated the notifications and investigations and reports that followed whenever a senior officer lost control. She looked exhausted, looked like she had aged 5 years in 3 hours, looked like command was a weight she had not wanted and now could not put down. Emily, Chen said, are you injured? Martinez looked down at herself, blood-soaked uniform, dust in her hair, hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. No, not injured. Medical says Andrew is stable, serious but stable. They are flying him to Landstuhl. Good, Emily. You saved his life. I killed 2 others. You saved the one you could save. That is all any of us can do. Martinez wanted to believe that, wanted to accept that triage was mathematics, not morality, that choosing was not the same as killing. She could not make herself believe it. Not yet, maybe not ever. Where is Brennan, she asked. Detained, under guard. CID is inbound for investigation. What happens now? Now we write reports. Now we notify families. Now we try to explain to people back home why a decorated colonel fired 5 shots at his own medical officer. Now we live with it. Martinez walked to her quarters, stripped off her uniform, stood in the shower for 20 minutes trying to wash off blood that had dried into her skin. She thought about her brother Daniel, about how he had died waiting for help. She thought about how she had sworn that would never happen again. She thought about how keeping that promise had required choosing one life over 2 others. The water ran red and then pink and then clear. The blood was gone. The weight remained. It always remained. That was what war taught. Weight was permanent. Everything else was temporary. She dressed in clean utilities, walked to the chapel, found Rhodes sitting in the quiet. I need to talk, she said. Rhodes gestured to the bench beside him. I am listening. I think I made the wrong choice. Tell me. She told him everything. Andrew, Parker, Mitchell, the 5 shots, the drive forward, the triage decision, the guilt that felt like drowning. Rhodes listened without judgment, without interruption, with the patience of someone who had heard 1,000 confessions and understood that sometimes talking was the only medicine that worked. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Emily, do you know what the hardest thing about being a chaplain is? No, sir. It is telling soldiers that their guilt is proof they are good people. Bad people do not feel guilty. They do not question their choices. They do not lie awake wondering if they made the right call. You are carrying guilt because you care, because those 2 men mattered to you, because you understand the weight of the choice you made. That does not make them less dead. No, it does not. But it makes you someone who will fight harder to keep the next ones alive. And that matters. Martinez wanted to believe him, could not quite manage it. They sat in the quiet chapel as afternoon became evening, as the sun set on a day that had broken a commander and killed 2 soldiers and left everyone else trying to make sense of mathematics that had no solution. Somewhere in Germany, Andrew Brennan fought for consciousness, brain swelling, Prognosis uncertain. Somewhere in America, two families were about to receive the knock on the door that changed everything. Somewhere in the detention facility, Colonel James Brennan stared at walls and relived Quang Tri province. Except now his son was among the dead. Except the decision he made at 17 was playing out again at 69. Except this time he had not just failed to save them, but had actively prevented someone else from trying. And in the medical tent, Martinez's aid bag sat on a table, still blood-stained, still ready, waiting for the next time war demanded she make impossible choices. Because war always demanded more. It never ran out of demands, and soldiers never ran out of blood to pay them with. 8 weeks after the 5 shots that shattered a battalion, the military justice system convened at Joint Base Lewis McChord to determine what happens when a decorated warrior breaks. The courtroom was a sterile space designed to contain emotion. Rows of chairs facing a raised bench where 5 senior officers would serve as judge and jury, their combined experience spanning 3 wars and 100 difficult decisions that had somehow not ended in court-martial. Colonel James Brennan sat at the defense table in Class A uniform stripped of rank insignia, his chest still carrying the weight of 40 years rendered in colored ribbon, but his shoulders carrying something heavier. He was 69 years old and looked 75. He had aged a decade in 8 weeks. The iron that had held him upright through 4 decades of service had finally been under weight it was never designed to carry. The gallery was packed with journalists, legal observers, veterans advocacy groups, and soldiers who had served under Brennan and could not reconcile the man they knew with the man who had fired 5 shots at his own medical officer. Captain Rebecca Chen sat in the 3rd row, testimony prepared, knowing her words would help condemn a man she had respected. Staff Sergeant Craig Thompson sat beside her, survivor of Andrew's vehicle, witness to what happened when doctrine collided with reality. Specialist Marcus Washington wore his dress uniform for the first time since basic training, the fabric still stiff, the tie uncomfortable around his neck. He had been subpoenaed to testify about what he saw, what he did, how it felt to tackle his battalion commander and wrestle a weapon from hands that had led soldiers through Fallujah and Kandahar. He did not want to be here. None of them wanted to be here. But war created obligations that extended beyond preference. The prosecution was led by Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Vance, Judge Advocate, General Corps, 15 years of military law, known for thorough preparation and the ability to present cases with clinical precision that left no room for sympathy. She had reviewed every document, interviewed every witness, constructed a narrative that was legally airtight even if morally complicated. The defense was led by Marcus Webb, civilian attorney, 72 years old, Vietnam veteran himself who had taken the case pro bono because he recognized in Brennan something he had seen in mirrors for 50 years. Webb moved slowly, spoke carefully, carried himself with the dignity of someone who had learned that rushing accomplished nothing worth accomplishing. He had been in country in 1970 and 1971. He knew what Quang Tri province looked like. He knew what it did to young men. The charges were read with the formal precision military justice demanded. Assault with a deadly weapon, conduct unbecoming an officer, failure to maintain military discipline, reckless endangerment. Each charge carried potential for years in confinement, for dismissal from service, for the complete destruction of a career that had defined a life. Brennan stood while charges were read, back straight despite everything, muscle memory, maintaining military bearing, even when the substance had eroded. He entered a plea of guilty to the lesser charges, not guilty to assault with intent. His voice was steady, his hands did not shake. Whatever had broken inside him 8 weeks ago had calcified into something harder, colder, resigned to consequence. The trial began with prosecution presenting evidence in careful sequence, building a case that was less about legal complexity and more about establishing a pattern. Lieutenant Colonel Vance called witnesses who described months of escalating tension, who detailed the arguments between Brennan and Martinez, who painted a picture of a commander losing control gradually and then suddenly. Staff Sergeant Thompson testified about the convoy incident 3 weeks before Operation Iron Fist, about the soldier who lost his leg, about Martinez's frustration and Brennan's intransigence. His testimony was factual, professional, devastating in its simplicity. 2 soldiers injured, 8 minutes response time, 1 amputation possibly preventable, Tension between commander and medical officer reaching critical levels. Captain Chen described intelligence reports, tactical planning, the morning of Operation Iron Fist. She detailed how Brennan increased CCP distance from 3.5 to 4 kilometers, how Martinez objected, how the disagreement that had been simmering for months finally boiled over. Chen's voice never wavered. She presented facts without editorializing. The facts spoke loudly enough. Then prosecution called Captain Emily Martinez. She walked to the witness stand in dress uniform, hair pulled back, face composed into professional neutrality that probably cost her considerable effort to maintain. She had not seen Brennan since the morning he fired 5 shots. She looked at him now, briefly, and something passed between them that the court reporter could not transcribe and the panel could not interpret. Martinez was sworn in. Lieutenant Colonel Vance approached with the careful respect of one professional addressing another. Captain Martinez, please describe the events of October 7th that led to Colonel Brennan discharging his weapon. Martinez had prepared for this question, had rehearsed answers with JAG advisors, had tried to find words that captured truth without condemning a man who had been trying, in his broken way, to keep her alive. She found no such words, so she settled for accuracy. We received reports of casualties from Lieutenant Brennan's vehicle. 3 urgent casualties, including the lieutenant. I believed immediate medical response was necessary. Colonel Brennan ordered me to remain at the CCP. I disagreed with that order. I moved forward to respond to the casualties. And what did Colonel Brennan do when you moved forward? He drew a sidearm and fired 5 shots. The courtroom, already quiet, achieved a deeper silence. Everyone knew this fact. Hearing Martinez state it plainly made it real in a way documents could not. Were you hit by any of these shots? No, ma'am. Did you believe Colonel Brennan intended to hit you? Martinez paused. This was the critical question. Intent separated assault from attempted murder, professional breakdown from criminal action. She had spent 8 weeks considering this question. She still did not know the answer. I believe, she finally said, that Colonel Brennan intended to stop me. Whether he intended to do so by hitting me or by frightening me into compliance, I cannot say. But when someone fires 5 shots in your direction, intent becomes less important than survival. Fair point. Captain, can you describe Colonel Brennan's demeanor during this incident? He was not himself. He was shouting about 12 men dying, about not being able to watch it happen again. He appeared to be experiencing severe psychological distress. Did you know about Colonel Brennan's experiences in Vietnam prior to this incident? I knew he had served there. Lieutenant Andrew Brennan had informed me about the squad Colonel Brennan lost in 1971. I understood his decisions were informed by a trauma. I disagreed with letting that trauma dictate current operations. But you moved forward anyway, despite his orders, despite his trauma, despite him drawing a weapon. I am a doctor, ma'am. Soldiers were dying. That is the only relevant fact. Even if disobeying orders and moving forward put you and your team at risk. Martinez met Vance's eyes. Ma'am, I took an oath to do no harm. Sometimes doing no harm requires accepting risk. That is what soldiers do. Lieutenant Colonel Vance nodded, made a note, continued. Captain Martinez, after this incident, after you proceeded forward, what did you find? I found 3 casualties. Lieutenant Andrew Brennan with traumatic injuries requiring immediate surgical intervention. Private First Class Joshua Parker with a sucking chest wound. Specialist Ryan Mitchell with massive abdominal trauma and arterial bleeding. And you treated Lieutenant Brennan first, is that correct? Yes, ma'am. Why? He was closest to my position. His injuries were most immediately treatable. That is standard triage protocol. Not because he was the commander's son. The question hung in the air. Sharp, accusatory, exactly what prosecution needed to establish bias or favoritism or the moral complexity that would make this case about more than just 5 shots. Martinez felt the weight of this question, understood it would follow her for the rest of her career, knew that answering wrong would define everything that came after. Ma'am, I treated Lieutenant Brennan first because that is what my training dictated, not because of whose son he was. In that moment, he was not the commander's son. He was a 29-year-old soldier with a collapsed lung and falling blood pressure. That is all. But Private First Class Parker and Specialist Mitchell died while you treated Lieutenant Brennan. Is that correct? Martinez felt the words like bullets. Yes, ma'am. Could they have been saved if you had reached them immediately? If the CCP had been positioned closer as you recommended? The courtroom was silent. Webb started to object, but Brennan touched his arm, shook his head slightly. Let her answer. Let the truth be told. Martinez looked at the panel, at 5 senior officers who had made their own impossible choices, who understood triage, who knew that in war some mathematics had no solutions. I do not know, she said quietly. Parker's wound was treatable. Mitchell's was severe, but potentially survivable with immediate intervention. Would 8 minutes have made the difference? Would being positioned 800 meters forward instead of 4 kilometers back have saved them? I do not know. I will never know. I only know they died and I was not there in time. Her voice cracked slightly on the last words. She recovered quickly, professional to the end, but the crack was enough. The panel saw it. The gallery heard it. This was not about doctrine versus innovation. This was about soldiers carrying the weight of choices that had no good outcomes. Lieutenant Colonel Vance concluded her questioning. Defense took over. Webb approached slowly, carrying himself with the careful dignity of age and experience. Captain Martinez, he began gently, how long have you been a military surgeon? 8 years, sir. And in those 8 years, how many combat casualties have you treated? Martinez calculated quickly. Approximately 240. 240, that is a significant number. Of those 240, how many survived? 218, sir. So your success rate is 91%. That is remarkable. That is significantly higher than the military average. Martinez did not respond. Numbers were insufficient to capture what success meant when it was measured in lives saved and lives lost. Captain, in your professional medical opinion, was Colonel Brennan experiencing a psychological crisis on the morning of October 7th? Yes, sir. He was clearly suffering from acute stress reaction, likely related to unresolved trauma from his service in Vietnam. And despite that crisis, despite him firing a weapon in your direction, you proceeded forward to treat casualties. Why? Because soldiers needed help, sir. Because that is my job. Even when your commander, a man with 40 years of experience, explicitly ordered you not to go, even when he was willing to use deadly force to stop you? Martinez paused, understanding this was the defense's strategy. Paint her as reckless, as insubordinate, as someone whose aggressive tactics provoked Brennan's breakdown. She could defend herself, or she could tell the truth. Sir, I believed Colonel Brennan was wrong. I believed his trauma was preventing him from making the correct tactical decision. I believed soldiers would die if I followed his orders, so I disobeyed. That is the truth. And 2 soldiers died anyway. The words were cruel but necessary. Webb needed to establish that Martinez's aggressive positioning, her refusal to follow doctrine, contributed to the tragedy. That Brennan had been trying to prevent exactly what happened. Yes, sir, 2 soldiers died. Whether they died because I was too far away or because their wounds were too severe, I cannot say. But they died, and I carry that. Webb nodded slowly. As does Colonel Brennan carry the 12 men who died in 1971, as do all of us who have served in combat carry the ones we could not save. The question before this court is not whether tragedy occurred. Tragedy is inherent to war. The question is whether Colonel Brennan should be held criminally responsible for trying to prevent what his experience told him would result in more deaths. Objection, Lieutenant Colonel Vance said. Counsel is testifying rather than questioning. Sustained, the panel president said. Mr. Webb, do you have further questions for this witness? No, sir. I believe Captain Martinez has demonstrated the complexity of the situation sufficiently. Martinez was excused. She walked back to her seat feeling hollowed out, feeling like her testimony had somehow betrayed both Brennan and herself, had told truths that illuminated nothing and complicated everything. The trial continued through the afternoon. Sergeant Major O'Brien testified about Brennan's leadership, about his efforts to mediate between commander and medical officer, about finding Brennan alone the night before the operation, looking at a photograph of dead men from half a century ago. O'Brien's testimony was compassionate but honest. He loved Brennan like a brother. That did not excuse 5 shots. Specialist Washington testified about tackling Brennan, about the look in the colonel's eyes, about words spoken that were not coherent orders but trauma made verbal. Washington's voice shook when he described wrestling the pistol away, when he talked about respecting Brennan and being terrified of him simultaneously. Chaplain Rhodes testified about PTSD, about spiritual wounds that never healed, about soldiers who carried wars inside them long after the shooting stopped. He spoke with the authority of someone who had been there, who had survived his own demons, who understood that breaking was not weakness, but the inevitable result of asking humans to absorb more horror than humans were designed to process. Then defense called its witnesses, character references from soldiers who had served under Brennan for decades, medical experts who explained complex PTSD, who detailed how trauma could lie dormant for years before emerging in crisis, military historians who contextualized tactical decisions, who showed how Brennan's doctrine had saved lives in previous operations. And finally, surprisingly, defense called Lieutenant Andrew Brennan. Andrew walked to the stand with a cane, moving carefully, the traumatic brain injury evident in the deliberate way he placed each step. He had been medically retired from service 2 weeks ago, deemed unfit for continued duty, another casualty of Operation Iron Fist, even though he had survived. He wore civilian clothes. The uniform did not fit anymore, in ways that had nothing to do with size. He was sworn in. Webb approached with visible gentleness. "Lieutenant Brennan, thank you for being here today. I know this is difficult." Andrew nodded slowly, the movement cautious in a way that suggested his brain still had not entirely forgiven the explosion. "Yes, sir." "Can you tell the court about your father?" Andrew looked at Brennan, saw his father seeing him, saw pain that transcended any injury from the RPG. "My father is the best officer I've ever known," Andrew said simply. His words came slowly, carefully, as if he had to check each one before releasing it. "He taught me everything about being a soldier, about honor and duty and sacrifice, about taking care of your people even when it costs you everything." "Did he teach you to follow orders?" "Yes, sir, always." "And did you follow orders on October 7th when he told you to hold position and not engage the enemy element you had identified?" The courtroom went silent. This was new information. This changed the narrative. Andrew looked at his father, looked at the panel, and something flickered across his face. Uncertainty, confusion, the shadow of traumatic brain injury making memory unreliable. Andrew paused, struggled. "Sir, I remember seeing enemy fighters. I remember requesting permission to engage. I remember my father saying no, and then..." He stopped, face tight with concentration. "And then what, Lieutenant?" "And then I remember being in the vehicle moving. I remember thinking we needed to stop them. But I cannot clearly remember if I gave the order to move or if I was just thinking about it when the RPG hit. The explosion, it makes things unclear." Webb let this sit for a moment. The ambiguity was powerful. "Are you saying you might not have disobeyed the order? That you might have been holding position when you were hit?" Andrew's face showed distress. "Sir, I have told myself for 8 weeks that I disobeyed, that I moved my element forward, that I got my men killed because I thought I knew better than my father. But honestly, I do not know. The medical team says TBI can create false memories, that the brain tries to fill in gaps. I remember movement. I remember deciding we needed to act. But whether I actually gave that order or whether my brain constructed that memory after the fact, I cannot be certain." The courtroom absorbed this. If Andrew had not disobeyed, if he had been in position when hit, then the entire causal chain shifted. Then Brennan's breakdown was not about his son's disobedience, but simply about his son's peril. Webb continued carefully. "Lieutenant, why do you think you remember it as disobedience?" "Because," Andrew said quietly, "that makes sense of it. If I disobeyed, then there is cause and effect. Then my choices led to consequences. Then there is someone to blame. But if it was just bad luck, if we were in the right place and got hit anyway, then it was random. And random is harder to live with than guilty." "So you constructed a memory of guilt to make sense of chaos?" "Maybe. Or maybe I really did disobey and the TBI is making me doubt real memories. I do not know. That is the truth. I do not know." Webb nodded slowly. "Lieutenant, setting aside whether you moved your element, what can you tell us about your father's state of mind on October 7th? Andrew took a breath. "My father has spent my entire life trying to keep people alive. He watched 12 men die when he was 17. In Quang Tri Province, 1971. They died because medevac could not come in time. He has spent 52 years making sure that never happens again. When I got hit, when Captain Martinez wanted to move forward, he saw 1971 repeating. He saw his squad dying. He saw the corpsmen running forward into danger. He saw 52 years of trying to do the right thing collapsing into the same mistake. And he broke. He broke. Yes, sir, we all break eventually. The question is not whether we break. It is whether the institution that broke us takes responsibility for breaking us." Are you saying your father should not be held responsible? I am saying my father held himself responsible for 52 years, for 12 men who died when he was too young to know better, for every soldier who died under his command since then, for me, lying in a ditch, bleeding. He has been his own harshest judge for half a century. Punishing him will not bring back Parker or Mitchell. It will not heal my injuries. It will not change anything except destroying a good man who has given everything to this country and received trauma in return. Webb nodded slowly. No further questions. Lieutenant Colonel Vance approached for cross-examination. Her voice was respectful but firm. Lieutenant Brennan, your loyalty to your father is admirable. But the facts remain. He fired a weapon at a superior officer. That cannot be excused by trauma or explained by your injuries. Andrew met her eyes. Ma'am, I am not asking you to excuse it. I am asking you to understand it. To understand that when you send a man to war for 40 years, when you deploy him to Vietnam and Iraq and Afghanistan, when you expose him to decades of violence and death and impossible choices, something breaks. Maybe it breaks slowly. Maybe it breaks all at once. But it breaks, and when it breaks, we can either punish the broken man or examine the system that broke him. Did Captain Martinez's aggressive medical tactics contribute to this situation? Andrew considered carefully. Ma'am, Captain Martinez was trying to save lives. My father was trying to prevent deaths. They were both right. They were both wrong. That is what war does. It puts people in situations where every choice is simultaneously correct and incorrect, where doing the right thing gets people killed and doing nothing gets different people killed. Blame is insufficient to capture that complexity. So you believe no one is responsible? I believe everyone is responsible. Me for whatever I did or did not do. My father for breaking, Captain Martinez for pushing, the Army for deploying my father for 40 years without adequate mental health support, the war for existing. Take your pick, ma'am. There is plenty of responsibility to distribute. Vance had no response to that. Andrew was excused. He walked past his father, paused, met his eyes briefly. Something passed between them. Not forgiveness exactly. Understanding, perhaps. Then Andrew left the courtroom, leaning on his cane, carrying his own weight forward, uncertain of his own memory, but certain that blame solved nothing. The trial concluded after 5 days of testimony. Closing arguments were delivered with the passion and precision that high-profile cases demanded. Lieutenant Colonel Vance argued that trauma did not excuse criminal behavior, that commanders were held to higher standards precisely because they commanded, that Brennan's actions endangered lives and violated fundamental military discipline. Webb argued that the military had broken Brennan over 4 decades, had taken a 17-year-old boy and sent him to war repeatedly until there was nothing left except trauma and training. He argued that punishing Brennan was punishing the symptom while ignoring the disease, that every officer in that courtroom could have broken under similar circumstances, that grace was not weakness but recognition of shared humanity. The panel deliberated for 14 hours. Soldiers waited, families waited. The media speculated. Martinez sat in her quarters unable to sleep, replaying testimony, wondering if she had said the right things, wondering if there were right things to say. The verdict was delivered on a gray morning that matched the mood. Guilty of assault with a deadly weapon. Lesser included offense. Not guilty of assault with intent to kill. Guilty of conduct unbecoming an officer. Not guilty of failure to maintain military discipline on grounds that the failure was medical rather than moral. The panel had split the difference, recognized both crime and context, tried to balance justice with mercy in proportions that would satisfy no one completely. Sentencing came next. Dismissal from service. Forfeiture of 50% of retirement benefits. 3 years confinement at a military facility. Mandatory participation in PTSD treatment programs. The sentence was severe but not crushing, punishment but not destruction, acknowledgement that Brennan needed help more than he needed prison. Brennan stood while sentence was read, accepted it without visible reaction, turned to leave the courtroom in the custody of MPs who handled him with more gentleness than protocol required. Before he reached the door, he stopped, turned back, looked at Martinez one final time. "Captain," he said, his voice carried in the silent courtroom, "you are a better officer than I deserve to command. Take care of my soldiers." Then he was gone. led away to begin serving a sentence that would never adequately address what had broken or why or how to prevent it from happening to the next warrior who served too long and saw too much. Martinez sat frozen, unable to process what she felt. Relief that it was over, grief that it had happened, anger at systems that created situations where good people destroyed each other. She had no framework for reconciling these emotions, so she did what soldiers do. She stood, she saluted the departing flags. She walked out of the courtroom into a world that had not changed despite 5 days of testimony. The weeks after the court-martial were administrative chaos. Brennan's wife visited him once at the confinement facility, a meeting that lasted 30 minutes and ended whatever remained of their marriage. She filed for divorce citing irreconcilable differences, which was legally accurate if emotionally insufficient. 40 years of military marriage had not prepared her for a husband who fired weapons at his own subordinates. Brennan's daughter maintained minimal contact, sending brief emails, unable to reconcile the father who had raised her with the felon who now occupied that space. Only Andrew visited regularly, driving from Seattle every other weekend despite the journey being difficult with his injuries. They talked about nothing important: sports, weather, books Andrew was reading. Neither mentioned the trial or the 5 shots or what came before. Some conversations required avoiding the actual subjects that mattered. Martinez received her promotion to major, accepted command of medical operations for a different battalion, tried to focus on the work that had always been her refuge. But Parker's face waited in quiet moments. Mitchell's voice echoed when she closed her eyes. She attended their funerals, stood in the back, did not approach the families because what words could bridge that gap? The battalion that had served under Brennan was disbanded, personnel scattered to different units. The organizational structure deemed too damaged to continue. Washington transferred to stateside assignment, completed his enlistment, declined to re-enlist. War had revealed complexities he was not prepared to navigate. Chen was promoted to lieutenant colonel, took a teaching position at West Point, used the case as required study in her military ethics course. O'Brien retired after 30 years of service, moved to Montana, worked with veterans programs helping soldiers transition to civilian life. He visited Brennan monthly, 2 old warriors who had survived the same war from different positions, now occupying similar spaces. They fished. They talked about nothing. They existed in the companionship of shared trauma without needing to verbalize it. Chaplain Rhodes continued his work. Adding Brennan and Martinez to the roster of broken soldiers, he tried to help find peace. He was less successful than he hoped, more successful than he feared, which seemed to define most of military chaplaincy. Brennan served 18 months of his 3-year sentence before being released on parole, deemed no longer a threat. He moved to a small town in Montana where no one knew his rank or his record or his shame. He worked as a hunting guide, taught people about tracking and patience and respect for things that could kill you. He lived alone in a cabin, maintained sobriety, took his medications, attended counseling. Martinez completed her service commitment, left the Army after 12 years, returned to civilian practice at Johns Hopkins. She married a fellow physician, had a daughter, built a life that looked successful. But Parker and Mitchell lived in her house, invisible roommates. She established a foundation in their names, providing combat medical training, trying to ensure future surgeons would have better tools. Money could not resurrect the dead, but it could honor them. 5 years after the 5 shots, there was a memorial dedication at what had been Fo Pamir. A small monument honored 23 names, including Parker and Mitchell. Chen organized it. O'Brien came. Washington came. Rhodes came. Martinez came after hesitation. Brennan came last, driving all night from Montana. He was 74 now, looked every year. People noticed him, some approached. Most maintained distance. The ceremony was brief. Names were read. Words about sacrifice were spoken. It was generic but sincere. After, Martinez saw Brennan standing alone near the memorial. She walked over. They had not spoken in 5 years. "Colonel," she said, then corrected. "Mr. Brennan." He turned. "Captain, Major, Dr. Martinez." "Emily is fine." They stood in silence. "How are you?" Brennan asked. "Managing." "They are good answers," he said. More silence, the memorial between them. "Jim," Martinez said, "I have needed to tell you something for 5 years. I should have listened to you. About forward positioning, you were right. Experience mattered." Brennan felt no vindication, only sadness. "Emily, you were also right. Your data was accurate. We were both right. We were both wrong. That is what I learned in 5 years. The war was the problem, not us. Does that make it easier? No, but it makes it true. Martinez nodded. She wanted to say more. She said nothing. Your son visits you, she said instead. Every other weekend. He should not, but he comes. That is good. They watched others talk. Emily, Brennan said, if I could go back, if I could change that morning, you would make the same decisions because you are who you are, because Vietnam made you that way. And you would make the same decisions. So we were both doomed. Probably. Free will is complicated when trauma makes choices. A younger veteran interrupted. Brennan excused himself. Martinez was left alone with the memorial. She touched Parker's name, then Mitchell's. Cold bronze. Andrew appeared beside her, moving carefully with his cane. Major Martinez, he said. She turned. Lieutenant, though that is wrong now. Medical discharge. I have good days and bad days. Today is manageable. They looked at the memorial. I am sorry, Andrew said. Parker and Mitchell died because of choices I made, whether I remember them clearly or not. Martinez felt tears. Andrew, you made decisions. They went wrong. I made decisions. They also went wrong. We all made decisions that seemed right and produced wrong outcomes. Does that make it easier? No, but it makes it true. The same words his father had used. I think about them, Andrew said. Parker wanted to marry his girlfriend. Mitchell sent money to his mother. They had lives waiting. They died in war, Martinez said. War killed them. Not you, not me, not your father. War. Andrew wanted to believe it, could not quite manage it. Martinez could not either. Thank you for saving my life, Andrew said. I wish I could have saved all three. So do I. Andrew moved on. Martinez stayed with the bronze names. Brennan was returning to his truck. Their eyes met across distance. No words, just acknowledgement. Two people who had survived something that killed others. Brennan raised his hand slightly. Not quite a wave, not quite a salute. Recognition. Martinez returned the gesture. Brennan got in his truck and drove away, back to Montana, back to solitude. Chen approached. Ready to go? Martinez took one last look. Give me a minute. Rhodes appeared beside her. Emily, he said, how are you? Managing, Chaplain. Managing is courage. It does not feel like courage. It never does. You have been functioning through fear for 5 years. That is courage. Does it get easier? Rhodes considered. No, it gets different. The weight becomes familiar. You learn to carry it, but it never gets lighter. That is not comforting. Truth rarely is, but it is honest. Martinez nodded. Did you talk to Colonel Brennan? Rhodes asked. Briefly. Did it help? I do not know. Does anything? Time helps. Not by healing, but by adding distance. I have 43 years to go until I have your perspective. Use them well. Help the next generation. That is how we honor the dead. Martinez absorbed this. Thank you, Chaplain. You are going to be fine, Emily. Not happy, not healed, but fine, which is all war allows. He walked away. Martinez stood alone as afternoon shadows lengthened. The bronze names caught light, remained cold. She touched Parker's name one final time, then Mitchell's. Then she walked away, back to Chen, back to the life built from pieces war left. The drive back was quiet. They stopped for coffee at a roadside place. What are you thinking? Chen asked. Martinez was quiet then. I am thinking we tell young people war is about courage and honor, but we do not tell them about the parts that come after, about living with choices, about carrying ghosts, about becoming someone who can never quite fit back into civilian life. Do you regret joining? Martinez considered. Some days yes, some days no. Today, sitting here after standing at a memorial with names I helped put there, yes, but tomorrow I will probably feel different. The regret is not permanent, neither is the pride. They alternate. That is honest. Honest is all I have left. They finished coffee. The sun was setting. They returned to the road. Martinez thought about Brennan alone in Montana, about Andrew in Seattle, about Parker's grave in Nebraska and Mitchell's in Michigan, about scattered pieces of what had been a battalion. She thought about 5 shots fired on an October morning, about how sound traveled through time, about whether echoes could ever stop. She thought about 43 years until she would have Rhodes' perspective. 43 years of carrying weight. It seemed impossible. It seemed like the only option. So she would do what soldiers do, carry the weight, function through fear and guilt and grief, help the next generation understand realities behind romance, honor Parker and Mitchell by ensuring their deaths purchased something of value. It was not redemption. It was not healing. It was not resolution. It was all war offered, all war allowed. And sometimes on good days it was enough. The road stretched ahead into darkness. Martinez closed her eyes, leaned against the window, let motion carry her forward. Behind her, 5 years and 5 shots away, a memorial stood in Afghan dust marking names that would fade except in the hearts of people who carried them. Parker, Mitchell, and all the others. The vehicle drove on. Darkness deepened. War continued its permanent residence in minds of everyone it touched. And in Montana, in Seattle, in Baltimore, in a dozen places, people who had been there that October morning went about business of living with what could not be changed, carrying what could not be put down, functioning through weight that would never decrease. They endured. It was all war asked. It was more than most people had to give. But they gave it anyway, because they were soldiers. And soldiers carried on, even when carrying on was all they had left. Even when the weight threatened to crush them. Even when the ghost grew louder than the living. They carried on, because that was what soldiers did.